Greetings, everyone. It's Dr. Mordecai, and thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Discovering Your Mission with Dr. Mordecai. On today, my guest, Dr. Martha Parham, Senior Vice President for the American Association of Community Colleges, leading their efforts in public relations. A native of the great state of Virginia, Dr. Parham has had a storied career and continues to make major impact in the world of higher education and community colleges all over the country. Now, you want to talk about someone who has major impact in terms of crafting, branding, marketing the story around community colleges and understanding the impact that community colleges are making all over this country. Well, you want to talk about Dr. Parham. Now, before she was doing this work, she used to work for Disney as an Imagineer, working out there at Disney World, but she also has done some amazing work working in the California community college space as well, even led a campaign around an $800 million bond. She's going to talk about all of the skills necessary to succeed and how you craft, brand yourself, an institution, the message, the overall movement of higher education, specifically the great work happening for community colleges. Without further ado, my interview with Dr. Martha Parham. Greetings, everyone. It's Dr. Mordecai. Thank you once again for joining me for Discovering Your Mission with Dr. Mordecai. Today, I have a guest, but more than importantly than a guest, a friend, a colleague, someone who I definitely look up to in the work that she is doing. I've already introduced her, but I'll just say it again. She serves as the Senior Vice President of Public Relations for the American Association of Community Colleges. We have the pleasure today of having Dr. Martha Parham with us. How you doing, Martha?
I'm so good. Always good to spend time with you, Dr. Mordecai. Always good to see you and take a few minutes to catch up.
Well, listen, you are a mover and shaker. You do so much for AACC, for the sector of higher education, community colleges, and you have such a rich experience. I don't know how many people have had a chance to either attend some of the sessions that you have you've provided through AACC over time. And I just remember going through the New President CEO Academy as well as Future Leaders Institute with AACC. And there was so much information that you began to share in those spaces that I had never heard before. And so I'm really excited about what you will share with us on today. Let's start here. I didn't know that we both share that we both used to work for Disney, which is the coolest thing, but you worked in the community college space, not only in public relations, but also in fundraising. So you've had some great successes. Just kind of walk us through what has been your journey that has led to you being a senior vice president for AACC.
Well, it's been, once I got out of Disney and into the community college space, it's a pretty interesting line. I started actually as a temp. A friend of mine had interviewed for a temporary position. I had recently stopped working for Disney and she interviewed for a job and decided it wasn't a good fit for her, but she knew it would be a good fit for me. So pretty unheard of, you never hear of anyone saying, hey, I'm not going to do this, but I have a friend. So I started working temp in the public relations department at a large district in Southern California. And I moved on from there. I was hired as a classified staff member, moved into management, and ended up on chancellor's cabinet. And I believe my title may be the longest in history, but I had public relations, marketing, foundation, as you mentioned, government relations. So it was really fun. I got to touch a little piece of everything and learn a little bit about all the things that happen at community colleges. We had 3 colleges in our district. I also was able to teach a class. But really it was one person, my chancellor, Dr. Bill Vega, who came to me and said, I'd really love to promote you, but you need a master's degree. And at that time, I'd always been in the business world. And I always thought you needed an MBA, and I didn't want an MBA. And he just started giggling and said, I don't care what you get it in, go get your master's. And so I enrolled literally the next week. I started my classes in my master's program. And it was really because of him, him telling me, I see something in you. That I just began my journey, and I've never looked back, and I absolutely love it. It's absolutely the place I'm supposed to be.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm curious to know. I could only imagine the lessons that you've learned over time. You're working in D.C., so you're based out of Washington D.C. You've worked in other parts around the country. But as I think legislatively, as I think about where society is today, the questions that it's asking of itself about the value of higher education, you've watched this growth in this movement in community colleges over a long period of time. I just want to know, what are the lessons that you've learned that have really just remained with you working in these various spaces and getting access to spaces that others would never ever get a chance to experience. What have those experiences taught you?
Well, I think they've taught me a few things. The old adage, everything changes, yet nothing changes. So I remember being a very young government relations professional working on things like the higher education reauthorization. And we're still working on that today. So a lot of those, issues tend to still be playing out in Washington, D.C. But some changes that I've seen that I find fascinating are really the sentiment around community college. So often we hear about the community college, that it's not as good as, or we don't feel like we're as respected as. I call it the Rodney Dangerfield system, right? Where everyone thinks, oh, we're just not, oh, well, if I could have just done this, and we get no respect. We get a lot of respect. The tide has absolutely changed, especially in Washington, D.C., around the sentiment about community colleges and the value that they bring, not just to the local communities, but also at the national front, right? I mean, the community colleges are being looked to solve national issues, workforce pipeline issues, education for first generation college students. They really are well respected. And I think the rhetoric that we hear so much around higher education is really aimed at, especially from the elected officials, is really aimed at those high dollar colleges. And I am not here to bash any college. I think there's a place for all of us. We are all doing this work to help students. But I do think that the issues that we hear about student loans and the high cost of education and the value of education is really aimed at those high dollar, for-profit Ivy League schools that cost a lot of money, and really are not aimed at community colleges. But it's really hard to separate if you're not living in the thick of it in Washington, D.C. And lastly, I'll say, as disappointing as this is our elected officials are simply humans. And so they react and respond because of their own lenses, the way they view the world and their own experiences, not unlike our students, not unlike the people we work with. They've all had their own experience, and that's how they're going to react to community colleges. And so the divisive nature of Washington, D.C. now is really, I have to say, it's really disappointing. I think it's worse than ever. I personally believe that their job is to reach across the aisle, find a common ground that we can all agree on, and move the country forward. And it's just not happening right now. And that can be disappointing. But again, I don't think that's aimed at community colleges. And that's the good news. So in terms of your audience, community college professionals, just know that we are absolutely on the upswing. And keep doing what you do, because it's absolutely working. We're the largest sector of higher education.
Absolutely, and definitely making an impact. Let me ask you this. Can you tell us about how you have sustained yourself in this environment for so long? You have, I think, back to looking at all of what you've accomplished thus far. You were working out of, make sure I get this right. It is Coast Community College District. We were talking offline here, but just to bring the viewers and watchers, the listeners into this, you played a role in having the third largest bond at that particular time passed, over 900, I think you said $80 million bond passed at that time. You've been operating at such a high level, whether it be DC, community relations, crisis management. And there are so many in the profession
whether it be higher education, whether it be business, whether it be society, whether it be life, the folks are burned out. They're just realizing that I've got to do something different to take care of my health. You've been able to sustain a high level of performance for quite some time. How? Bring us into how. What wisdom do you have there?
Oh, I wish I could answer this question with something incredibly profound. It's simply one foot in front of the other. I think that certainly students, knowing that you're making a difference for students. When I was working at the college district and teaching, that was, it was truly those student milestones. And since I've been in DC, having some of my students come to DC, and some of them are working there now and reaching out, that just, kind of fills your bucket and makes you want to do it more. And honestly, it's working with people like you and finding people that have common, goals and interest, and say, hey, let's put aside the political correctness of our work, and let's just talk about what's really happening and what's really working. And you are certainly one of those people for me. But really just having a great team around you, and getting excited about the things that are happening in higher education. I'm not great at work-life balance. I don't think many of us are. I tend to do more work than I probably should. But I'm working on it. I'm actually actively working on being better balanced about that. But I think you just you get inspired and you get motivated by the people you work with and the people you work for. And when you hear someone that's talking about their experience and how it changed their life, or you're seeing someone that you've known for a long time who's now a college president and is just absolutely out there making a world of difference in their community, present company included. It's just really, it's exciting, and it makes you want to keep doing it. So I think it's again, I hate to be cliche, but find something that you love to do, and you won't work a day in your life. So not to say that I don't work, but there's just a lot of good comes from this sector, and working with the people and the students and those that benefit is truly motivating.
In addition to that motivation, let me ask you this. I can only imagine that there have been experiences, whether it be DC, whether it be outside of DC, where you're met up against barriers. You need to get something accomplished, yet it has been a challenge. And I'm curious about this from your personal journey standpoint, because how many senior vice presidents of AACC, do we get a chance to talk to? And you've been able to now navigate your way from the actual community college district in California all the way up now to what arguably is the largest stage for community colleges from a national and world view. Curious to know, how did you navigate the challenges? You talked about working hard, yet you said that you found purpose in your work. So it wasn't really working. You felt as though you've been doing purposeful work. You talked about already, just really leaning into what it is that you do. And I can tell the level of intentionality that you bring every day to your work. But how have you navigated these spaces?
That is a great question. And I'll say this, it may not be popular, but it's true, is that it's still very much a male dominated field. And so as a woman, I still, I wouldn't call it imposter syndrome, because I'm pretty confident in what I do and how I do it. I'm not trying to be arrogant, but I do think there's still a tendency. And so here's my example. I walk into a room, I work for someone, Dr. Walter Bumpus, who is obviously a leader amongst leaders in the community college world. And it doesn't fail. At least once a week, someone will say, Dr. Bumpus and Martha. Right? So automatically, I don't get the same. I have a doctorate too. I did that as well. And so not that I need that, but it just goes to show you that men are often, it's assumed that they have the credentials and the background and the skill set. Women, on the other hand, have to announce it. And so that's been an interesting thing for me to navigate. So I will say this, for me, it's always been about building. I may not have a lot of people that I would consider actual real friends, but I have great ones who are always there for me, who always have my back, who have always helped me to navigate these issues. And so that to me has really been like building my own support system, and understanding that you have a lot of colleagues. You may not have a lot of friends. But you and I were joking earlier before we started about there's certain people in your world that can call you, and no matter what you're doing, you're going to stop what you're doing and do it for them. And those are your people, right? And so I think I cannot stress enough to build that network of those people that have you in good times and bad, who will tell you the truth, even if it's not what you want to hear, and who will, just always be there to help pick you up. That's how I got the job at AACC. It was a friend of a friend of a friend who everybody knew each other. And, I wasn't looking for a job. It just kind of happened. And I said, oh, well, being from this area was one of the only places I would consider moving to. And it just went from there. And it turned out that almost all the people in my circle knew of or knew Dr. Bumpus personally. And so it just turned out we had a lot of connections in common. So he was able to vet through his own circle, right, of people he can trust and go, no, really, what's the deal with Martha, right? And I was able to do the same thing, and it just, kind of fell into place. But I think I don't know how I can express more eloquently the need to truly have, because being a president, especially for you, you really are an island, right? You have your staff, and you have trusted staff members, and you have people that work for you, but ultimately you're the one, right? You're the one that's responsible. And they all report to you. And so it can be a very lonely and challenging place. So I think, just having those people in your life, it's just, I can't even describe how important that has been to me.
Thank you for sharing that, Martha. Thank you for sharing that. And I feel even compelled now to say Dr. Parham for the rest of this interview. So I
No.
But
funny you say that, though. There was a study done of, and I have to find it for you, but it was really interesting of people and how they were introducing males and females in rapid succession. And it was assumed, it was like 90% of the men were introduced as Dr. So-and-so.
Wow.
And it was only like 30% of the women. And it was the women that had the doctorates. So it was just this really interesting case study of, I don't think there's any harm intended. I don't feel like someone's saying I'm less than. It's just a societal thing that happens. And it happens to all my female colleagues too. So just an interesting thing to note.
Dr. Parham, thank you for sharing that reality. And let me ask you this. I'm going to switch gears here. One of the trainings that I attended, it was one of the very first engagements I had with you, which is at the Future Leaders Institute, which, let me just take a plug and just share for anyone that's watching this, that you have aspirations towards serving in excellence in higher levels of the of community colleges. Future Leaders Institute is a pathway for you, as well as if you are considering serving as a college president, you want to consider the Future Presidents Institute. Both of those are hosted by AACC. I am an alum of the Future Leaders, and I've had the pleasure of teaching as guest faculty for both programs. But let me ask you this, Dr. Parham. You shared in the FLI back then that I attended in D.C. About the trainings and the awareness that we should have for those of us that are serving in critical roles within our community colleges, which brings me to the question I have for you. What advice do you have for presidents seeking to improve their college's public relations? What are some of the things that we all need to keep in mind, whether it be prepping for the college presidency or operating as a vice president, maybe a cabinet member? So we'll just kind of open this up here. But what advice do you have for those that want to advance their PR at their particular college?
Wow. I mean, it's such a great question. And I'll start with this. It's a very unusual role at community colleges because sometimes you have, like, my role at the community college district was I was on the chancellor's cabinet. I reported directly to the chancellor. I was kind of in the middle of everything from the board to, marketing for classes, to enrollment management, to accreditation. I was able, HR, I was really able to learn so much from just being in that role. But at other colleges, particularly at smaller colleges or at rural colleges, they may have one person that's writing press releases, taking pictures at sporting events, running ads for enrollment. And so it varies widely. It's one of the few roles in community colleges that varies widely. So I will say this, as a president, as a leader, you need to understand what your brand is. Now, your brand is not your logo. Your brand is not your colors and your mascot. Your brand is your promise to your constituents. So the brand is super important because you want to make sure you're living up to that brand as your promise to the community. And so I think if you think about it in those terms, what is my promise to my students, to my community, to my neighborhood, to my local workforce folks? What is that promise that I want my college to make? And so once you understand that, and that becomes the basis for which you do your work, then you can really better promote your college. You get everyone on board that understands, like, this is our promise to the community. Someone who does that really well is Russell Lowry Hart. I don't know if you know Russell, but he's really
My bow
amazing.
tie brother. My bow
Yes.
tie brother.
Yes, he's so great. I call him the unicorn because he really does, walk the walk and talk the talk. And he does it with such, as you said, intention and purpose. But he's really great at everyone at the college feels the ability and gets the permission, if you will, to uphold the promise. Right? So whether they're teaching a class or working in the cafeteria, it is their job 100% to fulfill the promise to that student that they're serving. And I think from a PR perspective, you can't get better PR than that, right? If you, as a leader, if you're looking at a postcard or a television commercial to equate to enrollment, or to equate, you can't say we put out a newspaper ad and we got 10 people to apply. That's just simply not the way marketing and PR works. So really, if you have one thing that you can do in the PR spectrum, it would be to figure out what your brand is and then live it. And get your ducks in a row. Make sure your board knows it, your people know it, your mission, vision, and values all align to that brand. And once you have that and everybody's on the same page and everyone's aligned, a lot of that will fall into place. But the other thing, now this is a little more brass tacks when it comes to PR, and you know this, you've heard me do this several times, is understand crisis communication. If you don't have a big PR team and you don't have, someone that's dedicated to crisis communications, which I doubt you do, make sure you have someone that understands it and make sure you know what you don't know. Because it's the one job in the PR world that you never want to implement, but you have to have some sort of sense of. Because we all know as leaders, especially in public institutions, something can go wrong very, very quickly. And in this world of social media and rapid news and 24-hour news, things can spiral very quickly. So it could be as simple, and I've lived them. So trust me when I say this, I have lived them. I have lived everything from, we had a group of students that decided they didn't want to say the Pledge of Allegiance before their meetings anymore. that ended up on Fox News, on national news, on Veterans Day, as, these crazy liberals, look what they're doing to our education. Everything from that to the absolute God forbids that we won't get into, but including and up to murder and things like that have happened in my watch, within and surrounding my community. So you definitely need to have someone that understands that, or at least understand what you don't know, so that you can react quickly when you need to.
Thank you for that, Dr. Parham. I've got you for two more questions. You've offered so much advice already, so I won't ask you an advice question. Let me tweak this a bit to ask your thoughts. What are your thoughts about the future of higher education?
Oh, wow. Well, I think I said earlier, there's a place for everyone, right? In my other life, I serve on a foundation board for my sorority. So it's very much focused on four-year university. And let's face it, being in a sorority is not cheap. So we're not talking about, inexpensive things. So it's a very different measure of higher education. But at the end of the day, it really is just about students. But my thoughts in particular on higher education, and I think that students are changing and have changed. And our system, ironically, is built upon a system that is meant to not include people, right? We're built on a system that was built for white, rich men, and it was built to really exclude people, and give them a place. And so we have this model, and we perpetuate this model, and it works because we have accreditation, and it's the same model that you went through and I went through, and all the hoops. And I don't think that students, if you look at the different generations, you look at the way students view education, they don't view it in a linear format anymore. So they don't necessarily care. I'm a Gen Xer, and so we knew we had to get through education, right? It was a means to an end. We needed to get our college degrees so we could go out and get a job. That's just the way it was. Nowadays, though, students have figured out they can go take one class, build a business, sell it off, start something else, right? So they're not looking at it. They don't necessarily care about a linear degree. They have to a certain extent, because that's what gets them jobs. But the minute that, we're kind of at this tipping point, and the minute that tips, and you're starting to see it with certificates and learning. Remember when coding was going to be the next big thing? Well, now kids learn how to code in elementary school.
That's right.
And so we have to really be prepared to transform our institutions, because they're built in a way that works for us, the administration, not necessarily for this next generation of students. And while I do think there's a place for everyone, and community college is certainly the great equalizer there, I do think that we too need to really look at how we are providing this education, and really, really look to this next generation of students and understand. You have little ones, so some of the things they're learning. Their classroom spaces are incredible, right? In a post-COVID world, the expectation for technology is through the roof from all of us. And so there are so many things that I think are going to transform even more than they have already. But I do believe that linear education, where you go to school, you take these classes for a certain amount of time, and then you get your degree and you move on, is really no longer. It's really more of a winding road. It's like that kid from the cartoon that used to be in the paper, where you'd see his footprints go all around because he was constantly wandering. That's what our students are going to do from now on, and so it's just something we need to be prepared for.
Great wisdom, great thoughts, great insight. This brings me to the very last question I have for you, Dr. Martha. And that is just, again, for all those watching, all those listening, you know that the name of the show is called Discovering Your Mission. So I like to wrap up every interview by asking this one final question. That is Dr. Martha Parham, will you please share with us what your mission statement is and your why?
Well, my mission statement stems actually from the Alpha Gamma Delta purpose. And I won't say the whole thing because it's very long. But there are two lines that I tend to live by. And I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it is to, hold on, now you got to say it, the whole thing in your head so you can get to the right line. But it's to cherish friendships with but a chosen few and to study the perfecting of those friendships. So I really think it is the people around you. I always tell my nieces and nephews, right? You don't have to have a lot of friends. You just have to have the right friends. So I like to hold up the people in my life that help me to rise up. I think that's what it's all about. As a manager, as someone who has a team that reports to them, I think my first job is to make sure they have what they need to do their job well, and feel comfortable. And I think if we can all just get there and understand that and be around the people that lift you up, be around the people that hold you up, and be around the people that hold you accountable. That is truly, if one person can do that, because of something I've said, I will feel like a very accomplished human being.
I love it. I love it. So rich. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for gracing us with your time, your wisdom shared. Dr. Martha Parham, Senior Vice President for Public Relations for American Association of Community Colleges. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. It is always a pleasure to see you and to be around someone I do consider a friend. So thank you, Dr. Mordecai.
Dr. Parham, once again, thank you so much for your time and wisdom shared. At this point in the journey, I'd like to share with you my 3 key takeaways. However, I want to encourage you to find your 3 key takeaways, but here are my 3 that I want to share with you as we close out today's show. Number 1, Dr. Parham talked about the importance of understanding crisis communication. It is unfortunate at the rate that crises occur at our respective institutions. However, it is so important that you know your role within that crisis communication chain and have an understanding of how crisis communication occurs at your respective institution. I thought that was pretty insightful. Secondly, we heard Dr. Parham talking about figuring out what is your brand and live it. I can't tell you how many people I talk to that are aspiring to be college presidents, but they don't have a sense of their personal brand, their value that they want to communicate to a hiring committee, to a college, to say that not only am I in love with your institution and want to do my job to serve you at the highest levels, but I need to understand my brand and the value that I'm bringing to the institution, that I'm bringing to the community. And once you are successful at communicating that, it is so important that through intentionality and commitment and integrity that you live that out. Dr. Parham talked about that. Last but certainly not least, Dr. Parham talked about building your own support system. You've heard me say this before, especially in my Good Morning Champions messages and some of those other platforms and how I've shared information, but make sure you don't do more for these institutions than you do for yourself. Well, if you talk about stakeholders for an institution and having great support staff and team members and those that want to see the project and the institution succeed, you got to do the same for your own personal life. What intentionality are you putting behind those efforts? Dr. Parham called that out. She talked about that. I hope that this interview added value to you in your personal journey. As always, head over to itsdrmordecai.com for more content. I wish you all the absolute best in your journeys. Take care.